Hello, and welcome to another edition, the 17th episode of our podcast, Existential Ambiguity. You know, we'd like to have a better name than that, but I can't think of one, because it really describes exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The book, Buddha's Teaching and the Ambiguity of Existence, by Weti Muni. And Weti Muni is not a well-known Buddhist author, unfortunately, because I think he makes some excellent points here. He is trying to express the Buddha's teaching in the language and using the methodology of the existentialists. And of course, their methodology is phenomenology or self-observation. But he also remains true to the original suttas of the Buddha, which is something you don't find very often these days. We're on his chapter 5, I believe, and that's about the 5 aggregates.
The 5 clinging aggregates.
Clinging aggregates. In other words, the 5 aggregates as experienced by the Puthujjana. And of course, the 5 aggregates are matter or form, rupa, feeling, vedana, perception, sanya, determinations, sankhara, and consciousness, vijnana. However, in the Puthujjana, these things are clung to, and therefore they be called upadaniya dhamma, things to be clung or held to. So why is the Puthujjana always involved in clinging? Because he's trying to make I and mine. He is, in other words, synthesizing a self out of his experience. And these 5 things, matter, feeling, perception, determinations, and consciousness, or the 5 aggregates, are the stuff which is experienced. And so that's what there is to cling to.
That's his whole world, phenomenologically speaking.
Yep.
That's what shows up in his space.
Yeah, and so he clings to them, and therefore, in the case of the Puthujjana, they're called the 5 clinging aggregates, Panchupadana Khandha. So his entire being, his entire universe, his opportunity set of possibilities for action, experience, and consciousness is bounded by the totality of these 5 clinging aggregates, whatever he's clinging to. Because he can't cling to the whole thing. He only clings to those things that he likes or doesn't like.
Yes.
Attachment and aversion.
So he's not the stuff that he doesn't like.
That's right. He craves non-being in the case of aggregates that he does not like. That do not contribute to his sense of whatever his self is.
That does not give him a sense of pleasurableness.
Right. And that's a completely subjective determination. That's up to each and every person individually. Some people will like old cars. Other people hate old cars, and they don't even want to see one. Or whatever it is.
Most people don't like pain, but a martial artist, for example, might actually enjoy pain.
Physical pain can give rise to mental sensation of pleasurableness. And that's what the Puthujjana clings to.
Yes.
Not the direct experience, but the reflexive consciousness born of his process of identification. I-making and mine-making.
It's his sense of self that gives rise to pleasurableness.
Right, whatever his conception of who he is might be. Those things that do not fit either positively or negatively with this sense of self are simply ignored. And that turns out to be the majority of our experience, the majority of our impressions. Most of us are very busily tagging each and every sense impression as it comes in through the senses, either good, bad, or don't care. And that depends, again, on our sense of self and what supports it or denies it or is simply neutral.
So we're busy in a race leading up to the stuff we want. And
Well,
we
that's right.
don't see anything else except going for those things.
That's right. Even though there are other possibilities available to us, they're not part of our opportunity set because for us they have no value, either positive or negative. We used the example the other day of someone doing a piece of work, and meanwhile the birds are chirping beautifully in the background. He doesn't even think about the birds. He's not even aware of the birds. He's concentrating on his work because that's part of who he is. Or if a mosquito comes up and bites him, then he's concentrating on the mosquito because that's part of who he is not. So either attachment or aversion is something we give value to, and the value in this consideration is attention. The mosquito gets more attention than the beautiful birds.
And if he's really into his work, he won't even notice the mosquito.
Well, but I'm using an example of attachment and aversion. Or if someone comes up and interrupts his work, he'll be against that. He'll try to stop that. He'll try to make that go away.
Yes, we see that all the time.
We experience it ourselves. So when we are trying to make a self, or trying to make an I that has a particular characteristic, we tend to reinforce the things that help us make that I. And we tend to resist the things that are counter to that. And then the rest of our experience just slides on by unnoticed.
Yes.
This is because we are always processing. We're not just simply experiencing our life. We're processing that experience in terms of I and mine, in terms of making the ego. This is a good introduction to where we are in Wetimuni's book, the section called Consciousness, Perception, and Feeling. And you can download the book. There's a link in the post, and you can read along with us. Perception, sanya, refers to the quality of a percept or to the percept itself. The percepts are sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and idea or mental image. The qualities of a sight would be shape and color and so on. A sound has qualities of pitch, timbre, and loudness, for example. A taste can be salty, sweet, acidic, bitter, astringent, etc., and so on with all the others. We also see that the quality of a percept is independent of the perceiver. It is imposed on the perceiver, not entirely determined by his volition. When there is the sight of a tree, a shape is seen, but this shape is independent of the perceiver. Similarly, the pitch of a sound is independent of both the sound being heard and the hearer. In other words, pitch, or any quality of a perception, is something that is independent of the percept itself. I have hearing, and because I have hearing, I hear what's going on. And if there happens to be a sound that has pitch, then I also hear the pitch. That's a separate percept. Another good example is the sense of kinesis, sense of movement and balance of the body. I may have a sense of touch. I can feel my feet on the floor, I can feel the wind against my skin, and so on. But then there's another sense, or another percept, rather, that's abstracted from that, where I am aware of my body's attitude. Am I leaning forward or backward or to the side? Am I moving? In which way am I moving? And so on like that. This is a different percept from only touch. Yes. But if you look at it, it's actually only made up of touch.
Yes. Even the sense of balance in your ear is crystals touching some kind of receptor.
Yeah, there's a liquid in the inner ear, and as it sloshes around and as we move, it generates these feelings, touches.
Yes.
But then that is abstracted further to give us a sense of the attitude of our head, the direction, the acceleration of the movement, and so on. All these percepts are there. And they're more or less independent of both the original thing that they're based on, such as touch in this case, and the person perceiving them. Now here's a quote from the Buddha. And what, monks, is perception? Sanya. It is these 6 bodies of perception. Sight perception, sound perception, smell perception, taste perception, touch perception, and idea perception. Dhammasār. This is called perception. And that's from the Upadana Pariparvata Sutta.
So it's the quality of the senses that we perceive.
Yes, the quality. Doesn't it make a difference whether you see a white wall or a wall that's painted some shade of green or red or something like that? Doesn't it make a difference in the smell of, let's say, freshly baked bread versus the smell of flowers or something else? The smelling is always there, but the quality of the smelling is what really makes the perception.
Yes.
The quality of the sense experience itself is the percept, is the perception. Not the sense perception directly, but the qualities that go along with it.
Perception is also the name tag for the thing? Like earth as earth? Like would you see a tree and perceive tree as a tree in the perception?
Yes, but that's a higher level of processing. That's recognition. The direct experience is simply seeing the tree, a brown stick coming out of the earth with some green stuff on the top. But then you go through another level and say, oh, that's a tree.
But you're not always aware of it, that it's a tree. Sometimes you just see green stuff, green shapes.
No, if I'm carrying a bag of cement up the hill and there's a tree in front of me, I couldn't give a darn. I'm very occupied with this heavy bag of cement or the boards that we carry up to the construction site. It's not going to be something that registers. It's going to be part of the 90% that simply goes into trash.
Background noise.
A person who is enlightened is not like that. An enlightened person perceives everything around them in its original form and aspect.
Internally and externally.
And does not further judge it based on I and mine.
Does not add anything to experience.
That's right. The Buddha's definition of perception is a little bit different from the usual Buddhist philosophical idea of perception. In the commentaries and so on, Wetti Muni points out the Visuddhimagga, for example, tends to confuse perception, sanya, with consciousness, vijnana. It tries to understand consciousness as a more elaborate version of perception approximating to knowledge, jnana. But this is incorrect. Why would there be three terms for these three different things if they were all the same, or even approximately the same?
Makes sense.
Knowledge is something higher than simply consciousness, and consciousness is something higher than simply perception. While there is always consciousness where there is perception, there is not always knowledge.
First, there has to be consciousness of an object before you can perceive it, perceive the qualities in it. Because consciousness means that the object is present for you.
It has to be present, and then we can abstract the qualities from it by a process of recognition. Consciousness would be the lowest level, then perception, then knowledge. As we pointed out in the chapter on experience, Chapter 4, perception always precedes knowledge. Consequently, perception is structurally simpler than knowledge. Perception and knowledge differ in kind, not just in degree. Why? Because perception is simply the recognition of the qualities. Knowledge adds value to those qualities, either positive or negative or neutral. Consciousness is simply the presence of the object.
Consciousness connects with the name and form, and you have contact.
Then you have contact, and there's perception
in the contact.
And then there's knowledge of the perception, whether it's something favorable or unfavorable or neither.
Which gives rise to Vedana.
Vedana is?
Feeling.
Right. Feeling is whether it has positive or negative value, that's all. So what we're talking about here, by the way, is the sequence of events given in the dependent origination process. We'll get into dependent origination as a thing in itself a little bit later on in the series. Well, actually, quite a bit later on in this series. But I think it's actually part of the topics of the second noble truth. So in our book, Luminous Mind series, we'll get into it more quickly than we will in this series. That is how being and becoming take place. Being and becoming is a continuous process that's going on
in the mind,
in the
over
consciousness.
and over again. Not only the birth and death of the body.
Constant. Yeah. And that's another thing that Visuddhimagga tends to get wrong. They tend to say that karma is the realization of the effects that we experience in this lifetime from the causes created in the previous lifetime.
Which makes the whole thing totally deterministic.
It
takes free will out of the picture.
That's not right.
And the rascals can do their rascaldom and blame something else.
Karma made me do it.
Karma made me do it. I didn't have a choice.
Really?
Because I did X, Y, Z in the previous life.
And the same with the next life. They can say, well, I'm doing this so that I have better luck in the next life or something like that. But actually, it's a continuous process of becoming. And it begins from desire, which is a form of ignorance. That's why we're suffering. Because there's this automatic, natural, habitual process of becoming based on desire. So desire is the root.
Actually, craving is a better word, because desire has a slightly different translation.
Well, desire has to do with the future, as we discussed last time. Desire has a component of the future in it. Desire means we have something pleasant that we want to continue in the future. Or we have something unpleasant that we do not wish to continue in the future. That's desire.
But it's also tanha, craving, because the Buddha also says that the source of suffering is tanha, craving. And that can be for sense enjoyment, for being, or for non-being.
Tanha would be a better translation of the root of dependent origination.
Yeah, because
desire.
That's what emerges out of Vedana feeling.
Yeah, and desire kind of covers.
It's a subcategory of tanha, I think, actually.
Yes, right. However you define it, the perception and knowledge and consciousness are part of the same process, just different stages of it.
Yeah.
In the suttas, however, Weti Muni continues, we occasionally find vijnana being used in two senses, in the sense of consciousness in the primitive context of the aggregates, khandha, and in the sense of knowing, but never in the sense of perception. So consciousness can be primitive, or it can be a little bit more developed in the sense of knowing, but it's always distinguished from perception.
Consciousness can be like a state of consciousness. It's determined by what you put into it, because it's just a reflection of stuff. So if you reflect coarse sense enjoyment, for example, then it's a low state of consciousness. If your object of consciousness is the jhanas, then you're in knowledge.
Well, he goes on to say that in the next sentence.
Oh, really?
And when it is used in the sense of knowing, it refers to the complex consciousness of reflexion, with an X, the presence of a known phenomenon. So then here's a sutta passage where vijnana is used in both senses. Here, friend, an uninstructed putujana, unseeing of the nobles, undisciplined in the good men's teaching, regards matter, feeling, perception, determinations, regards consciousness as self, regards matter, feeling, perception, determinations, regards consciousness as self or self-endowed with consciousness, or consciousness as belonging to self, or self as in consciousness. That consciousness of his changes and becomes otherwise. As that consciousness, and here he uses the term vijnana, changes and becomes otherwise, so his knowing, vijnana, follows around or keeps track of that change of consciousness, and so on. And this is from the Uddesavabhanga Sutta.
Because there's one vijnana of the immediate experience, and there's one vijnana of the reflexive experience.
Right, exactly. Good insight, Ronnie. So consciousness then can be consciousness of direct experience, or it can be consciousness of reflexive experience, which is something processed. There's some computation based on the immediate experience. Feeling, now he gets to feeling, Vedana, is broadly of two kinds, bodily, kayika, and mental, cetasika. This distinction is not difficult to see and experience. For example, a painful feeling from a bodily wound would be classified as a bodily painful feeling. So would a headache. Sorrow and joy, on the other hand, would be classified as painful mental feelings. So would fear and worry. So dukkha, the Buddha's teaching, is to eliminate dukkha.
Mental suffering.
Well, dukkha can mean physical suffering. There's 3 or even 4 ways to define dukkha. The Buddha uses 4 slightly different terms for suffering. Here's the sutta. Monks, there are these 3 kinds of suffering. That's one use. What 3? Suffering caused by pain. That's the second use. Suffering caused by conditioned existence. That's the third use. And suffering due to change. And that's the fourth use. So in this sutta, the Buddha uses 4 different terms for suffering. Dukkhata. He says there are these 3 kinds of suffering. Dukkhata. This is the most general use of the word suffering. Dukkha. What 3? Suffering caused by pain. Dukkha dukkhata. Which is the sensation of physical or mental pain or anguish. Suffering caused by conditioned existence. Sankhara dukkhata.
Very interesting.
The suffering produced by mental fabrications and determinations. And suffering due to change. Viparinama dukkhata. The suffering caused when pleasant bodily and mental feelings inevitably change.
Wow, that's very nice.
Yeah. So there's 4 slightly different definitions or usages of the word dukkha.
3 different subcategories and the major category.
Yes. The teaching of the Buddha specifically and directly targets the sankhara dukkhata, the suffering produced by mental fabrications and determinations, because these indirectly cause all the other types of dukkha. And if we can eliminate sankhara dukkhata by a process of meditation and moral and ethical development and ultimately insight into the nature of suffering, then we can get rid of all kinds of suffering, including the physical suffering, because we won't take rebirth. That's not the immediate effect, though that is a later effect. The immediate effect is that by stopping mental fabrications, suffering due to them ends immediately. That's why even a tiny little bit of insight, just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg of insight, where you realize, oh, I'm fabricating this I and mine, immediately gives relief from suffering. I remember when I first started serious meditation back in October in Thailand. I mean, I had been meditating for a long time, but I was specifically referring to Buddhist meditation. I was meditating on a very simple premise of no self, the emptiness of self, emptiness of I and mine. Emptiness in this case means the lack of real existence. And within a couple of weeks, I got such fantastic results from that. Then, compared to the knowledge that we have now, that was like a blunt instrument. Thud. But still, it gave such tremendous relief from the suffering I was experiencing, the mental suffering, because as an adherent of Vedic religion for more than 40 years, I had been trying to create and maintain an eternal self.
And that whole story with all the devotees and all those years of nonsense.
All of that.
You were carrying all that along, and then you just dropped it.
I just dropped it because in about the period of a week or 2, I realized, there is no such thing as a permanent self. Impossible. Out of the question. Cannot be. So I just dropped the idea, and just the dropping of that effort of creating an eternal, permanent self was such a relief. Actually, everyone in every religion, including religions based on the Buddha's teaching, are trying to do this.
Yeah.
They're trying to create a self that won't go away, that won't change. What was that last type of suffering? Suffering based on the change when something pleasant changes inevitably. Because everything changes.
Yeah.
Everything, whether you like it or not. Sorry, it's going to change.
And there can actually, according to Buddhadas Bhikkhu, there can still be Vedana. You can still have pleasant feeling and pleasurable feeling as long as you're not attached to it, as long as you don't create a story about it. And then you're not attached to it, and then you know it's going to change and go away. So when it does, you don't suffer.
Yes.
Like you can still enjoy a good meal at the temple, but you're not attached to it. You don't
want it to continue forever.
No.
Yeah, we have very unrealistic expectations regarding the things we find pleasant. We really expect them to go on forever. And when they don't, we're very disappointed and upset. As if simply wishing them to be permanent would make them so.
Even wish that it would feel like last time.
That's never possible. Every experience is different and individual. It's never as good as the first time.
It's never as good as the first time, and the context is different every time also, so it's a completely different experience.
And you know why? It can never be as good as the first time, because the second time you have an expectation based on the first time.
Yeah.
And the first time you weren't expecting really anything. And so whatever it was wonderful and new, right? That experience, there is a specific quality of experience when you experience something for the first time that you never remember, at least, experiencing before. The fact that it's new, the fact that it's unique and unusual in your experience gives it a special flavor. We call it, sometimes we call it adventure. We call ourselves the adventure monks because we are always interested in going new places and having new experiences.
Yes.
That's the spirit of adventure. And that's a specific flavor. I think it's related to heroism and that kind of a feeling, exploring new things and so on like that.
In our natural state, every experience is new. So I think it's kind of longing for that state, maybe.
That's interesting. That's a good insight. Yeah, because we don't have any expectations in the enlightened state, in the natural state. But because we have so much reflective consciousness based on memory, we carry that memory around with us like a big bag of rocks, you know. And every time we have an experience, we check it. Well, is this going to be the same as the last time?
Is it even relevant to my story?
You know, we laugh at this. We do it ourselves, you know, all the time. But we have to laugh at it because when you look at it analytically, it's pretty ridiculous, you know.
We're sheikhs now, so we're observing this and kind of training it out of the mind.
Yeah, and a really good way to take these experiences is to laugh at them.
See how silly it is.
Yeah, rather than take it seriously. Now I'm going to create an expectation based on my previous experience. So you better meet my expectation now or else I'm going to be upset.
That's like stepping on a banana peel on purpose or something.
Enjoying the feeling of flying as you crash to the ground or before you hit. Anyway, there are all these qualities of experience that are perceptions in themselves and that can become objects of craving in themselves. Yeah. And that experience of a new thing is one of them. So the second time we do something, it won't have that quality of newness. It won't be so much of a surprise. There'll be more of an expectation there.
Some people even get addicted to having more and more new kinds of experiences and get clinging to that.
Yeah.
Even that gets jaded after some time.
Well, how many new things can you do before you run out, you know?
Like that person you were talking about that had a list of all those things.
Yeah, and she was going down the list one by one, jumping out of an airplane and doing
bungee jumping, sailing around the world.
All this crazy stuff that she wanted to do.
Creating this huge self.
Well, what's she going to do when she runs out, when she gets to the bottom of the list? Uh-oh. That's why one of the things that Werner said that was so cool was, you better watch out for success because you think you're in trouble now. But if you are successful, then you're really going to be suffering. Why? Because success is one of the things on your list, isn't it?
When you're striving for it.
Yeah, when you're striving for it, it seems like really far off and really implausible.
And a good idea.
And a very good idea. But then when you get there, you find out it's completely different than you thought it was going to be. All of a sudden, you've got all these people pestering you for your attention and time and energy. They want you to come here and do this and do that and so many things. And then you're going to have all these enemies, too, that hate you just because you're successful. Just because you're well-known or good at what you do or have a little bit of fame, whatever. And they're going to give you a hard time for no reason at all. They don't even know you. It doesn't matter. I can understand why sometimes these famous movie actors get tired of being photographed everywhere they go. Yeah. And it's like that for us, too. Just because we're different. Everywhere we go, people give us too much attention. We just want to be left alone.
Yeah. Everyone stops and stares. It's like
People stop and stare.
Circus is in town.
We're not putting on an act. We're just living our normal everyday life. But because we have a life, which most people don't, they find it irresistible to watch us. And it's very strange feeling. So watch out for success. Watch out for achieving any of your big goals in life. Because when they hit, you're going to experience a whole new kind of stress. Now, before I was in stress because I was trying so hard to reach my goal. Now I've reached my goal and I found out, it's not perfect. It's not the dream. It has its own reality, which is different from my expectations. So whatever it is, whatever your goal in life is, actually the best goal in life is enlightenment.
Yes.
Because that means the end of stress, the end of dukkha.
Being famous is not what it's cut out to be, because it's so much more disturbance coming from everywhere.
Yeah. Happiness means peaceful mind. Not the peaceful mind of the ignorant person, the peaceful mind of someone who is fully awakened.
Yeah.
That's completely different.
Not the sedated person, but the awake person.
So what we're doing in our work is we are using the internet, leveraging the internet to reach out to people and share this knowledge, which is, by the way, the best karma that you can possibly do. And at the same time, maintain our privacy and our anonymity. This is our work because we want to attain enlightenment in this life itself. That means we need to have a place where we can meditate with no possibility of disturbance. Not only do we not want to be disturbed, we don't even want to have the possibility of being disturbed. That's what it takes to reach the highest degree of concentration, the most focused. And that's what it takes to reach enlightenment. So we're doing this program, this podcast, instead of traveling around and giving lectures. It's better to give the podcast because then if people don't understand something, they can always rewind it and listen to it again.
Yeah.
It's actually better than a face-to-face talk. It's better than showing up somewhere and giving a lecture. Because now people can stop, open up the dictionary, look up the words. You are using your dictionary, right?
Of course they are. We have only intelligent listeners.
That's good. I hope the whole unintelligent listeners all go away really fast. They probably don't even get through the intro. Well, anyway.
Good sleeping medicine if you don't use a dictionary.
Yeah. You won't have trouble sleeping tonight. So what I would like to do then is finish up this section. We have a couple more paragraphs to go through. We want to talk about the words we use. Good time to bring this up. Dictionary and all that. We will use adjectives like pleasant, unpleasant, and painful to describe either bodily or mental feelings, mostly bodily feelings. Thus, a pleasant feeling can be either a pleasant bodily feeling or a pleasant mental feeling. But the adjectives pleasurable and displeasurable refer to some kind of consideration, reflexive consciousness. And they will be used only for mental feelings. Thus, a pleasurable feeling will refer to a pleasant mental feeling, and a displeasurable feeling will refer to an unpleasant mental feeling.
It's both for reflection and reflexion.
Yes.
Because you can think about the past and the future and have those feelings, and you can also be in the present moment as a putujana or a seka and have those feelings.
Yes. Pleasure and displeasure will be used only in reference to mental feelings, as will pleasurableness and displeasurableness, as opposed to pleasant, unpleasant, pleasure and displeasure. See, because they infer some kind of computation, some kind of processing.
Yes.
They're not just
immediate experience.
Immediate experience, right. Then he goes on to say, according to quality, any bodily or mental feeling can be of three types: pleasant, sukha, unpleasant, dukkha, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant, adukkama sukha. A headache is an unpleasant bodily feeling, kāyika dukkha vedana. Joy is a pleasant mental feeling, cetasika sukha vedana. As for neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, it is said, neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling is pleasant when known and unpleasant when not known. This requires some clarification. A neutral feeling, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, such as indifference, is known to be neutral. It is perceived or reckoned as pleasurable. Likewise, when there is a neutral feeling, but it is not known to be neutral, it is perceived or reckoned as displeasurable. In other words, if I'm thinking about something and I don't realize that it's a neutral feeling,
It's perceived as a...
I'll anticipate it being displeasurable.
Yeah, that's kind of the fight or flight response.
Yeah, that's the normal response.
Fear of the unknown.
Remember looking up words? Looking up words in the dictionary is something like that.
Yes.
Once you know it,
It's
it's pleasurable. But until you don't, while you still don't know it, it seems displeasurable.
And looking it up also seems displeasurable.
Well, but when you actually experience it, you realize it's neutral. That's simply the meaning of that word. And it's not good and it's not bad. That's just the way it is.
And if it gives you a ha moment, then it's very pleasurable.
Yeah. But the point is, the fact that this word has this definition is neither pleasurable nor displeasurable. It's just the way it is. It doesn't have any particular meaning for you unless it reflects on some other experience and adds to the meaning of that, either pleasurable or unpleasurable.
If you're reading something new and you come across a word you don't know, then that's displeasurable.
That's displeasurable,
yeah.
Right. And that's why it makes you want to run out of the room or throw a rock at the person who's giving you the misunderstood term or something. Or fall asleep. Start yawning.
Looking at the window.
And we see this in school all the time. Because in school, of course, the last thing they want you to know is how to learn. They just want to train you up as a good robot to work in somebody's factory or office.
Maintain the status quo.
Yeah, they don't teach you how to look up your misunderstood terms. And guess what? They heap misunderstood terms on you by the dozen every day. So guess what? You're going to be looking out the window, bored, doodling on your pad, reading comic books or whatever, daydreaming or whatever, because you want to run out of that room. That's really what you want to do. Why? Because they're giving you tons of misunderstood terms. A misunderstood term is a word or symbol for which you do not know the definition.
And you do not know that you don't know.
Right. That's a really misunderstood. If you don't know that...
An unknown word, I don't know what that means. But like a word like of, for example, you think...
Well, I know what that means. Sure, I know what that means. It means of.
3 of the definitions, and there are like 40 different definitions.
That's a good point. Unless you can replace that word with an equivalent phrase that means exactly the same thing as it does in that particular context, you do not know the definition of that word. That's the standard.
You have to replace the word with a clause.
That's right, or a phrase.
Or a phrase.
Yeah, or in a synonym at least. That says exactly the same thing as it does in that particular context. Otherwise, you don't know the definition. And if you don't know the definition, you don't know what the word means. And you are guessing.
And if you become able to do that with every word you encounter, then you become really, really smart.
Yes. I would say it would increase the average person's IQ by maybe 30, 40, 50 points.
Depending on how much they use it.
Yeah. If you really get into it and clear up your misunderstood terms, and they're usually the short words that identify relations between things, of such that, for, which, and so on. Up. Look up the word up. It has at least 20 major senses.
And sometimes it means the same as down.
Sometimes it does. We'll let you figure out the answer to that one. No, because it's worth the exercise, because then you realize how unlike mathematics our language is. In mathematics, everything means one thing and one thing only in a particular context. In our language of English, something can have more than one meaning, even in a particular context. And we have to sort through those meanings and find out the particular exact meaning in order to duplicate the thought that the speaker or writer is trying to tell us.
And even if you know the definitions of all the terms, you can still get it wrong.
That's right. So the ultimate test is if you can apply the knowledge. Like, for example, how would somebody apply this subject that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, you would use reflexive experience and try to recognize these things in your own experience.
How do you use reflexive experience, Arnie?
You have to observe yourself.
Ah! You mean we expect the people who are listening to this podcast to do self-observation?
Yes. Not only thinking about doing it, planning to do it tomorrow, like I did for many years when it came to Buddhist meditation. It's so easy to think about, you read a book about Buddhism and you think, oh, I'm going to meditate. But you never quite get there.
That cushion just sits over there in the corner looking at you.
Oh, now I studied so hard, now I got to watch some TV.
But the real application of this knowledge is in self-observation and meditation. If you do it, you will get the benefit.
Yes.
If you don't, there is no way that you can get any benefit from this. This becomes simply speculation.
You can do it both sitting down, establishing concentration, and then doing it in your own experience. And you can do it while walking around. And you should really do both. But if it's difficult to sit down in the beginning, maybe you should try to walk around. Maybe even go outside and do some public meditation.
That works too. Actually, whatever works for you. Some people find they can only really concentrate when they're absolutely alone. Other people can concentrate better when they're in some physical activity like walking.
Like when 30 people watch me eat, then I feel like my mind is being wonderfully concentrated.
It happens to us here all the time.
Get so self-conscious that I just go inside. Because you're supposed to sit there and be quiet,
Yeah.
So, dealing with the energy won't work. Good opportunity to go inside. But not everyone has the ability of gathering up a crowd of 30 people watching you eat.
Oh, it's very easy. Just go in a restaurant and be real.
Be real, okay. That won't
You'll
work.
immediately have everyone's attention. That's working with energy. Because everyone has a tacit social agreement not to be authentic.
Yes.
Therefore, if you go in a typical public space and you simply are authentic, you will automatically get everyone's attention. You don't even have to work for it, and you don't even have to do anything outrageous. It's just a matter of energy.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're out of time. Once again, I'm going to sign off here, and then we're going to take up next time with the classification of the different bodily and mental feelings. Vedana. Thank you for being with us.
Oh